Hey everybody, this is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series between two writers, me being one of them. I get to sit down and it's funny because I only record these once or twice a week, and sometimes I don't know, not that I'm not in the mood for it, but sometimes I've got so much stuff going on. I've got to go do this podcast right now, and I'll quickly research the person, and then it happens every time we just kind of get into this just free-flowing conversation, not knowing where it's going to go. And we have this kind of mind meld where it's just we can relate to one another and we can share stories. And I'm always fascinated to see kind of their journey. And some of the journeys are very different than one another. And some are very similar to mine. So it's, even if I don't know the person, it's always I always get excited once I'm actually talking to them. And today was certainly proof of that. Today I talked to Kimberly Giarratano, who is an author of several books for, initially she started kind of writing YA stuff for teens. And lately she's been writing more adult fiction. And she kind of even said in our conversation, in her newest book, the series, the protagonist has a parent who has early onset Alzheimer's, so she needed kind of a protagonist who is, potentially older than 16 years old. So she kind of went more towards adult fiction. Her newest book is Death of a Dancing Queen, which just came out in February, and it's getting great reviews already, and it's also has a fantastic cover. I love looking at book covers, and this one is really, really good. But yeah, her story is interesting, as you're going to hear. She kind of has always had that creativity in her. She was talking about, and and then trying to mesh that with kind of what do I want to do with my life is always a struggle for all of us. And went through, a few different types of careers, before really she started writing novels. But like I said, kind of started out YA and then graduated into adult fiction, and finally finding, the sizable publisher who got very excited about her books, and, things kind of just started taking off from there. So I feel like she's one of these writers who, when I talk to her, I'm like, oh, you're on the cusp of something big. So that's pretty cool. And it's going to be great kind of to watch your trajectory over the next several years. So I think you're going to like this one. Please listen. This is my conversation with Kimberly Giarratano.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you? I'm I can't get the thing on.
So first things first, can you pronounce your last name for me? Because I don't want to screw it up when I do your intro.
It's Giarratano.
Giarratano. I would have said Giarratano. So thank you.
You probably are closer to the Italian pronunciation. It's my married name. So.
Okay. Yeah. It sounds like, we're going to go visit some long lost relatives from the region of Giarratano in Sicily.
We were on a cruise once, and all the staff is from all over the world. And one man was from Italy. And I'm like, can you please pronounce the last name the way it's meant to sound? And he did. And I was like, oh, that sounds so beautiful. Because my in-laws are from Staten Island. So they're like, Giarratano. Doesn't sound all that nice.
Yeah. Well, they're probably used to saying a lot of Italian last names in Staten Island.
For sure.
My kids are obsessed with old episodes of Jersey Shore, and there's a lot of Staten Island references in that. That just seems like another world. So you grew up in Staten Island?
Believe it or not, I lived in Staten Island until I was about 6, and then I moved to Jersey.
Okay.
So my husband grew up there. Yeah.
Okay.
And now I live in Pennsylvania. So
okay. Yeah, you're up in the Poconos, right?
I am in the Poconos. So I am in my son's room because my children are getting home early today because of weather.
Oh, okay.
So I sent my husband to the bus stop, and that if they're home, it means I have to be squirreled away somewhere where they're not in the background, and that is in my son's room.
So you're trying to tell me that's not your piggy bank in the background and your pennants on the wall?
No, I wish I had an office, though. I'm not going to lie.
So just curious, so you growing up in Staten Island, where in Jersey did you move to as a kid?
So we moved to Monmouth County, which is central Jersey. Because if you take Jersey and then you break it into thirds, I
Right.
grew up in the middle third. And yeah, we moved to Monmouth County, Manalapan. And when I moved there, it was woods. And
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
it's McMansions and a lot of subdivisions and home, home goods and
Yeah.
uh, Ulta's there now on Route 9, like stuff that just wouldn't have existed
Right.
ever.
But when you were growing up, there was a lot of nature.
For a hot minute, it was a lot of construction. It really
Oh,
exploded in population. So,
yeah.
um,
Yeah. And what were your parents doing? What kind of work were they in?
so my parents were nurses.
Okay.
My mom was a registered nurse, and when we moved to Jersey, she would commute to Staten Island Hospital where she worked for a while until she got a job in Jersey. And then when I was about 9, 10, my dad went back to school to become a nurse.
Mm-hmm.
And so I used to help him with studying and typing up his papers because he couldn't type.
But that's a tough environment, right? Because those are long shifts, and I'm sure having both parents trying to juggle those schedules must have been a challenge for the kids.
You know what? It really was. It's interesting. Like my mom would work when I was really little. My mom would work 3 to 11.
Mm-hmm.
So she would get up with us, and then my dad would be home when we got home from school, and then he would feed us. But then when we moved to Jersey, I was like a latchkey kid. I was a Gen X latchkey kid in every sense of the word.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd come home, get the key out of the shed,
Right.
let myself in, have a snack, watch TV, do my homework until she got home from work.
So you had siblings or no?
I have a younger brother.
Okay. So what was what was he doing while you were letting yourself in and you were by yourself?
He had a babysitter. Like my mom would pay somebody after school to get him off the bus. But I was 8 at that time, and she's like, "You're old enough."
Yeah. Well, that's it. You're probably, I'm Gen X too. So that's probably on the cusp of, parents who would allow an 8-year-old to be a latchkey kid. I feel like today, like, I don't know if you would do that with your kids today. But I feel like, but back then it was like, no big deal.
Oh yeah. I remember walking home from the bus stop. This was in Staten Island at 5. And it was a long walk as I remember it. Maybe now it's not, but it was a long walk. And I was like, anybody could have picked me up off the street. I was not a smart 5-year-old child. I would have gone with anybody.
Right. Right. But it just was, I remember going to London with my parents when I was like 11, and they're just like, yeah, just go out and be back by like 5 p.m. And so they'd give me money. I would ride the tube and I would just explore London. I'm like, that's fucking crazy.
Your parents sound amazing though.
But the experiences you get from it, you become so mature. Now, I think, and I want to kind of tie this back to maybe, you growing up a little bit. Now, latchkey kid comes home and I assume they're just on their phone. They're just, in the pantry and on their phone. Whereas probably you had to kind of make a lot more effort to entertain yourself. And I don't know if books played a role in that or not.
I was a big reader as a kid. I don't know if I read when I got home from school. I was a big TV watcher. Like I'm still a very big TV watcher.
Me too.
I watch a lot of TV.
Yeah.
That is my form of entertainment and books, but I get most inspired by television, to be honest.
I'm 100% with you. Like I like books and I read books. I'm not a voracious reader. And I'm not a fast reader.
That's funny. Mm-hmm.
I used to be much more so until 20 years ago when I got into writing, but I will sit down and binge, a limited Netflix series and just pick it apart in my mind and really soak it in. And that's much more inspirational to me in terms of writing. And maybe you're the same way in terms of you're sitting down to write and things are kind of cinematic to you. You're like, I can see the shades of light through the slats of the shutters in this scene.
It's so true. Yesterday I sat down to write and I couldn't write the scene because I couldn't visualize it. I'm like, this isn't working for me and I can't figure out why. And it's because I could not visualize how I wanted it to start or how I wanted characters to come in and out. And I just couldn't get to it. And I just put it aside and I was like, I'll do something else. But that's actually what happened.
Yeah.
So I am a big TV is really influential, and sometimes the way I do look at a scene is exactly how I might see it on television.
Right.
And I think it works for me. It works for my process. But
Totally. Yeah. And yeah, I'm the same way. And it's funny because like my characters, I don't really have to understand exactly what they look like in my own mind. I have kind of a vague idea, but the setting, like if they're in an opulent house, I'm like, I understand exactly what this house looks like. Like it's a video game almost. But the characters are just kind of, I understand their personalities more than I understand how they look. And I tend not to even describe them very much because I don't want to put that into everybody's head. I want them to form their own opinion of who this person is. I don't know if you're the same way like that.
Same exact way. I think Hemingway never described characters.
Oh, really?
I think he was like, she put a hat on the table. Like that was as much description as you'd get from Hemingway. I really, I had some description, and I try to do it early because nothing kind of drives me crazier as a reader than when you have a picture in your head and then you find out like 2, 3, 4 chapters in that their hair color is not what you thought it was.
Right.
And I'm like, wait, no, that doesn't fit what I have in my head.
Yeah, so, that's a really good point. And, I had one book, Mr. Tinder's Girl, where I never described the protagonist. And one of the cover designs that the publisher proposed had this woman with long blonde hair. And I said, well, why is she blonde? They're like, well, that's Alice. She's blonde. Like, she might be blonde. I don't know. But yeah, but that would be the kind of thing where if somebody saw that cover, they'd be like, oh, she wasn't blonde for me. Right. So you were reading growing up. Did you see in yourself, or did others point out in you that like, oh, you're pretty creative, or you're kind of a natural storyteller? Or was there that kind of, you look back now and be like, oh, I see the hallmarks of what I was to become back then?
So these are great questions, man. Yeah. So when I was in 3rd grade, so I liked to write when I was a kid. I was very creative and imaginative. And then, I remember writing a short story in 2nd grade called Super Flower. It was like a superhero flower.
I love that you remember the name of it, by the way.
I do. I know. And then I remember in 3rd grade, we had a class project where we had to basically write a version of Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. We had to put ourselves, and we could either do a horrible day or an amazing day. And I decided to make myself suffer. Kimberly and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. And we had to read our stories aloud. And I will never forget this. It lives for me forever. I remember my teacher, I was getting up to read, and I remember her saying under her breath, oh, I can't wait to hear this one. Like, just that she, and I look back and I was like, she must have noticed that I enjoyed being creative, or I liked writing, or it was funny or something, because that's what she, it was meant to be like she legitimately was looking forward to it. And that really sparked something later. And I've always been a writer. I wanted to be, when I was a kid, Murphy Brown.
Yeah.
I loved Murphy Brown. I was like, I want to grow up and be this sardonic journalist. So I thought, like, I'll be a reporter. And I did. I wrote for my school papers, high school, college, middle school. But I didn't really have the hard-hitting, like, instinct for news.
Right.
I am too sensitive a human being, and I don't like getting yelled at. So.
Right. Or peeling back the horrible, awful realities that our world is, and then having to write about it.
Or, I mean, I'm very outgoing. I'll talk to anybody, but I would get so anxious calling up people and just asking them random questions for an article. I would get so nervous, and I wasn't I just wasn't my spirit. But what journalism really allowed me to do was write really, really well.
Well, yeah, it laid the groundwork for just understanding how to physically write, which is, I mean, which sounds basic and silly, but the reality of it is, learning, like actually writing well in any context, business writing, technical writing, whatever, is a really difficult thing to do. And there's a truth that I think exists across all those different types of writing, where you can learn, how to be pithy, how to get to the point. And it doesn't have to be this thick thing that makes you look smart, but it's inaccessible to people. And that's a really, I think, hard thing to learn that only comes after writing lots and lots and beyond classwork, beyond, critiques. You just have to do it a lot. So probably your work as a journalist, I mean, journalism is the bellwether of learning how to write, with brevity and to the point, and here are the facts. And to your point, not a lot of description because you don't need it. You're just reporting. And I'm sure that really formed how you eventually started to write novels. But I want to go back. And one thing that you said that was really interesting is you chose in that short story to make your character suffer. And you probably went through this mental thing where like, okay, a very good day sounds fun, but boring, to write about. And that's how I feel about stories is like, I don't want to write about happy things until that happiness has been earned through suffering. Yep. Because it's just not interesting to me. So you, at an early age, you're already recognizing conflict is much more has much more engagement than just this light little story.
I think also I thought it'd be funnier. So I like to be funny, and it's
nothing funnier than suffering. I'll tell you that.
I like funny, and I think it's funny when you make your character suffer, or at least, in whatever I wrote. I wish I still had it. My mom probably threw it away. She throws everything out, but I wish I still had it. But yeah, I probably thought it's funnier if I make the character suffer than if they just have a great day where they win the lottery. Like, who cares? Yeah,
that's what's the end point of that story. Like, you want, and humor, I think, is really interesting in writing. I write pretty dark stuff, but I think I'm very capable of writing tremendously funny things, and I really like to layer things in there. How do you figuring out how to balance that without making it kind of ridiculous? I don't know if you imbue a lot of humor in your books or not.
I do. Yes, I think it's unexpected humor, and it usually just comes from the character themselves, not from the situation being funny. Because I'm so inspired by TV, like I can't constantly have such tension because it's really difficult. You need to relax a little bit.
Right.
So a quip, something to alleviate some tension. I think I do it pretty well. I want to say, my ancestors are funny people. So I think I can handle it. And there's usually, I don't want to say a comic relief character. Like in my latest novel, my protagonist's grandfather is pretty funny. And the only reason why he's funny is he's a curmudgeon.
Right. That's because I think you just hit the nail on the head. You have to have a character who sees the world differently, and the humor comes through that purity of who that character is. Because if you do write, I think, a comic relief character, it's so obvious, and it has to be really well done when that happens, and that usually gets pulled off much better in like movies than books, because then it's just like, okay, I get what you're trying to do here, as opposed to having somebody with like a really dark sense and perspective on the world, and they say things that are a relief, even though they're like, oh my God, that's what a horrible thing to say. That's funny.
Are you watching Slow Horses?
We watched the first episode of that, and we haven't gone back to it, not because we didn't like it, but because of the million different things that we're watching. So do I need to just dive into that?
Please do. So I watched Slow Horses the first 2 seasons, and then realizing they're books afterwards, which I felt like an idiot. I picked up the 3rd book in the series because the first 2 books or the first 2 seasons I already watched. And I just wanted to skip to the 3rd book so that I was already in. But Mick Herron, talk about creating a comic relief character that is his worldview and his personality. It's so well done.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would like Jackson Lamb's character, who's the head of Slough House.
Okay. Yeah.
His comedy, it was like a study. I was like, I need to read, and I was reading it so slowly because I'm like, that's such a great line, and then I reread that, saw how he led up to it, and
it is a study, because I think with those, like, so you think of like a very traditional 1950s hard-boiled detective, is going to be very sarcastic and have a very grim view and can be funny. But a lot of times that is ultimately going to lack is any kind of true emotion. And I think you have to have that emotion in there in order for the reader connects. Someone like you want to have somebody who is still capable of understanding, the cruelty of the world and actually being affected by it, even though they have a shield up that might be kind of created by humor. It's a hard balance. And I think it only comes naturally to people who are able to write that, because I think it's just painfully obvious when it's trying to be shoehorned in there. So that's great that you do it, and I think that does resonate with readers and gives them that break and allows you to then go really dark because they've had a break. So what did you study in college?
So I have a degree in history.
Okay.
I went in as a journalism major and I was like, this is not for me. Also, somebody made a really good point there. Like, you could minor in journalism and still get a job in journalism. You don't have to major in it. So
that's a good point.
I went to a small liberal arts school in New Jersey. So I majored in history, and then I wanted to get my PhD in Latin American studies, but I couldn't get my, as one does, but I couldn't get my GRE scores up high enough, which is like, I could go off on I could die on the hill that is the GRE test, but I will not. And then I went and did a graduate program. I got a master's degree in teaching, and I taught ESL for a few years.
Okay.
Then I went back to school and got a master's degree in library science, and I was a librarian for a few years. I always say I'm overeducated and underemployed.
Yeah, I live in Boulder, and that's we got a lot of those people. Yep. But I mean, was it also a bit of you just like kind of finding yourself? Like, I haven't hit the thing that has, shown a light in my soul yet. So I'm going to keep trying different things.
And I am one of those people who always thinks, like, to do something new, you have to go to school and get training. And writing was like one of those. Becoming a librarian allowed me to see that I could be a writer, like write novels without having to get an MFA.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean?
Totally.
Or I read a lot more genre. I was a YA librarian, so I was reading a ton of young adult novels. And that's when I was like, wait, I could do this. You don't have to be a genius. I still say that I'm like with doctors. I'm like, anybody can be a doctor. You don't have to be that smart to be a doctor.
But it's so true, right? Because I mean, and I have very personal opinions about it, because I fell into writing, and from somebody who didn't know anything about anything, and so completely self-taught. I'm a firm believer of like, it's mostly about work. It's mostly about just physically writing and doing it over and over again and learning and being open-minded and being vulnerable to criticism. And sure, you could take an MFA, but if that gets you to write, that's fantastic. But I firmly believe there's clearly no one way to write a book. And so, to me, it's all been a matter of it is more the perspiration rather than the inspiration. The inspiration's got to be there, but if you don't put your ass in this chair and write, then it's never going to do anything. And we all know people like that. Yeah,
for sure. And I think a lot of it had to do, I mean, it took me many years to finally finish my first draft of a novel.
Sure.
False starts, procrastination, like, I heard a great metaphor once. It was like writing a book is sort of like knitting a sweater. Like, before you start, you're like, well, I know what a sweater looks like. It has a collar and its sleeves, it has cuffs, it's made, it's soft. I know, but how to knit a sweater? No, I don't know how to do that. So writing a book has always felt like I know what a book looks like, what it should sound like. But then sitting your butt down and actually going, all right, well, how do I construct a scene? It took a lot of, and I craft books. I would take some craft classes I did in the beginning, just like online.
Sure.
I did just read a ton of books on craft, and then I would kind of deconstruct novels a lot and see how they were put together.
Yeah.
So I did that as well. So it was a lot of it's definitely a self-taught thing.
And I did the same thing. I read several books about how to write. And then after a while, it becomes a little bit intimidating, because you're like, I've read 18 different ways of writing a book. And then you start to write and you're overthinking it. To me, I just found of like, what what would this person do next? And then think of it and then have them do it. And then just keep doing that until you get to the end. And then you can go back. I mean, I'm a huge believer in editing, I think, is where everything comes alive as much.
That's my favorite part.
I don't know if it's my favorite part, but it's the most important part.
That's where I'm the most focused.
Okay.
When I edit. Like so a bomb could go off.
So you finish your draft and then do you give yourself a little bit of time, or you just like, okay, next day I start at page 1 again, and I'll tend to like just read through the whole thing without touching anything and be like, what is this book about? And then start to make notes about like just grand level thoughts before I go in and start doing the surgery.
Nah, I just go right back into it. So I constantly go over things and reread and revise and do it a lot. And then I also plot really intricately before I.
Oh, see, I don't. I just wing everything. So that's why I have to reread it and just see what the book's about.
I just don't want to have to rewrite. I don't want to have to make big structural changes. So I like to make I like to make sure the structure is there. I just don't want to be like, oh, I have to move this and I have to change. I don't want to have to do anything like that. So I don't. And then I will go with a notebook and I'll read the scene. I'll be like, here's everything's wrong with it. Then I'll go to the next scene. Here's everything wrong with it. And it's amazing that I'm like able to do that. And sometimes I'll just be like away, like doing dishes. I was like, oh, wait, I know how to fix this. Then I go back.
Right.
So I just get in a zone, but I am a very distracted person. I am a big procrastinator. Writing is hard and I don't want to do it. So I do other things. Like I got to figure somebody teach a class on how to sit my butt in the chair and work. I would like appreciate that.
But I think you just encapsulated how most people feel about writing. Like, and I think a lot of aspiring writers don't necessarily get that. The fact that it's work and so my discipline is like I write an hour a day. That's all I do. But I write 7 days a week. And, if I don't do that, then things don't get done. And sometimes that hour is inspirational. Sometimes that hour feels like homework and it's not fun at all. But I'm like, if you keep doing it, you will build the muscle where even on the days that it feels like homework, you'll still be productive.
That is genius. And I actually would subscribe to that, and I should. And I was like, because people like, you should, you don't have to tell writers they should write every day, but people should tell me to write every day.
Yeah.
Like even an hour. I stopped making word count my benchmark and time instead.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great because you might be editing, so word count is meaningless, or you might be, even if you're working on a newsletter or something else, like, to me, habit is very important. So it's like I have to go into this room and have the lights just so, and of course, when I'm traveling, I can still do it, but it's like I do like to carve out the time when my phone is off, so I'm focused because it's only an hour, and it's just like working out, right? It's like I'm going to do it every day. And most of the days I don't like doing it, but I'm so happy when I'm done with it. You get that endorphin rush.
I always say writers are masochists. Like we do this thing none of us really want to do. I talk to a lot of writers and they're like, I don't feel like writing ever. Wow. I just want to have written. I want to,
Right. I mean, I will say for that hour, I don't do it till 5 p.m. So I've got the entire day where I'm kind of, in a way, looking forward to it because that hour is also a physical escape for me where it's like, maybe I'm dealing with a puppy all day. And now I'm like, I'm here. I have headphones on. I can't hear anything. And it's meditative in a way. And then it's so weird how like the first few minutes, you're just kind of distracted. And then all of a sudden you're like, where was I? Oh, here. Now I see it. And now the words just start flowing. And I'm like, holy shit, I've got 1,000 words in 45 minutes. That totally surprised me. Other days, maybe I'll just sit there, but there's something alluring that tractor beams you into that. And I think that's just people who are natural storytellers, I guess. So what was your experience like actually getting an agent and selling that first novel?
So it's interesting you should ask that. So I was an indie author for the most part, and I was publishing young adult literature, which I love. I was a YA librarian, so it was
okay.
And then I had this idea for a private eye for a detective that I wanted to tell. And I couldn't envision it with a young teenage protagonist because in the story, her mom has Alzheimer's disease, early onset.
Oh.
And I just didn't feel like a teenager would be able to grasp her future the way a slightly older protagonist would be. So one of the things I wanted my character to really have to confront is like, this could be her in, 30 years, 27 years. So
right. That sense of mortality. Yeah.
And I didn't feel like my 16-year-old would really do that. So
how old is your protagonist?
She's 24, so she's not super young, but she's not super old, I should say, but she's young enough where she is working and she's taking care of her parents, so she's parenting her parent. And 24-year-old Gen Zs now, many of them still live at home and still have a lot of bills paid by parents.
Yep.
Like normal things. It's hard to move out on your own. Life in the United States is so expensive. But in this case, she has become the parent. She is paying the bills. She has to have the flexible work schedule to help take care of her mother. And I really wanted to kind of explore that. So that's why I made her 24. Also, I was like, well, if the series takes off, I have all this room for her to grow and age. I wanted her to age.
Right. And I love the optimism too. When this sells 1 million copies, they're obviously going to want at least 8 of these books.
Well, I did think when I was writing it, I thought, I'll self-publish this because young adult wasn't working for me in an indie space because teenagers read books that they get from their friends, that their parents buy them, they get from the library. And my ebooks were really selling mostly to adults. So I thought I'd have more success.
Yeah, kids don't like ebooks. Yeah.
No. But long story short, I did get an agent through a referral. Her name's Liza. I love her. And I had a crappy agent a couple of years before that. I did not like him. And I should have trusted my gut. I was like, something feels off. But I do love Liza. She's wonderful. And it did take almost 2 years for the book to sell.
Yeah.
I will say that much.
Well, it's sold. I mean,
it did.
My first 3 books with an agent never sold.
Yeah, I am very grateful. And it's serendipitous because the reason Liza is so smart was that Angry Robots, who she did work with, she would sell, she has a client who went there to sell science fiction. She was talking to the editor and they're like, we're going to start a new crime fiction imprint. And Liza's like, I have a client for you. She wrote this kind of Veronica Mars type story. And my editor was like, oh, give it to me. And she's British. So the fact that that even clicked with her too, she's like, give it to me. And she wound up reading it in less than a week. And, I went from having nothing in less than a week to being told that they were going to take this to acquisitions and they were hoping to make it their lead title for the new imprint, which they did.
That's crazy. That's crazy, right?
It is crazy. It's crazy when I say it out loud too. Yeah, it is so awesome. Crazy. And it was surreal. I was like, really?
Wow. And so now with this editor, it's Datura.
Yeah.
Datura.
So I say it.
Being somebody who doesn't like to move stuff around in your books, what was your editorial letter like, and how did you navigate those waters?
I don't even want to say because it sounds so smug and braggy.
Oh God, they said you missed a couple commas.
Pretty much.
That's great.
My editor was like, "This is the cleanest manuscript I've ever edited in my entire life," and I was like, "Please don't get used to that." I mean, in fairness, like it had been shopped.
Right.
My agent looked at it.
It had been really worked over.
I had worked it over. And I was like, please do not get used to that because that's never going to happen again. I definitely made edits. I improved upon but I didn't have to make any structural changes.
Yeah, that's great.
I think I added a scene at the end. I changed the ending paragraphs a little bit. Like I definitely fleshed out some people more and some, but in terms like I didn't do any major structural changes because I never want to. Like that to me is like heavy lifting.
Well, nobody wants to. It's just we can't figure out how to make sure it's perfect the first time around. It's interesting reading all those craft books. I would get overwhelmed by all the information and try different systems. Yeah. And then of course, practice, like now you're like, meh. You find your own system. I have my own system, my own structure, and it works for me. And for the most part,
I don't fuss with it too much.
Yeah, but that's not, but it is always fascinating to me to you have a vision for when you write something, and then it starts going through, sure, it can go through a critique group, but like, you listen to different voices there, but then it goes to your agent who has opinions, and then it goes to your editor who has opinions. And sometimes you're like surprised. Like I just went through a 6-month edit where I changed the entire book from third person past to first person present. And it totally changed everything. It made it much better, but I didn't have, when I was going into it, I'm like, I don't think I could be first person present in this 21-year-old female savant, her voice. And then it turned out that was the best way to write it. But it's like, I didn't have that foresight to know writing it that I could do it, or that it was going to be better that way. So I had to go through a lot of slings and arrows to get to that point. So that's for me, it's tough sometimes. And then other times it's like you said, it's like, this is a clean manuscript. We don't really want to change much. So I mean, that's good.
This is my 7th book that I've written.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've kind of got it at that point. That's not to say, like, the manuscript I wrote previously, which is a different, not part of the series. It was another adult manuscript that I did. And then I did restructure it and rewrite it and change tenses and like all that stuff. I did all that. And I was like, I don't want to do this again. Ever.
Yeah. But and I think so. Yeah. So this was probably the 13th book that I've written, but the 10th to be published or will be published. And I think you do get to a certain point in writing where you're like, I want to try something different. I'm going to still be in kind of that swim lane of what I write, dark thrillers, whatever, but it's going to have a different feel to it. And that's exciting. But then that's also, I think, where it can be problematic because you kind of are new territory. And that's what I did with this. Was my pandemic book where it was a little bit more uplifting, a little bit happier. And a lot more episodic than all my other stuff. But it became problematic because of that. And because I wanted to do something. So it's weird, as much as we want to challenge ourselves, this book I'm writing now, I'm like, this is exactly, I know where this is going. I know the pacing. This is really a dark thriller that is very, straight through, and it's much easier to write.
Yeah. I find short stories are a good place to experiment for me personally. I love writing short stories.
Interesting.
So if I want to experiment, like I don't enjoy writing first person. I write mostly in third. I just feel like I sound better.
Yeah. And I'm just the opposite, but you find that voice where you're really good at that voice.
I just find I always think to myself, my writing is so much better in third person.
Interesting.
Like, third person close and first person really are not big differences for the most part, I don't think, but I just I think I sound better. Right. But I do I've experimented. That's to say my first novel I ever wrote was in first person, but then afterwards I was like, I like third better. But with short stories, I like the idea of experimenting with voice, maybe with my style a little bit. I can have fun because it's just low stakes. Yeah. Maybe.
Now, do you write short stories for specific publications, or have you been asked to write and to submit, or are you writing and submitting and seeing what's happening?
The last. I wish somebody would be like, Kim, write a short story for us for anthology.
But I find that fascinating because, to your point of like, writing is hard and not necessarily fun. To go and write short stories is I think it's a real labor of love. I've only probably done a dozen in my life, and it's hard work, and chances are they're not going to go anywhere.
Very good point. They haven't. I wrote the first short story I wrote for publication was for an anthology. It was like a contest, and it was done on one of those. I don't think it exists anymore, and I can't remember the name of the platform. It was sort of like, it was a reader center platform where you could vote. It's not the one that's most common that I'm blanking on. But anyway, it didn't get picked, but I was like, this is really good. So I submitted it to some like YA journals, and I was able to expand the word count. And one person gave me a revise and resubmit. And that was my first experience working like with edits. I'd never had anything edited before. So this was like,
that's interesting. Yeah.
so I did that, and then I self-published it for 99 cents. Like that's what I did with it because nobody
totally
wanted it. And I wrote another short story. I will reread it to this day and be like, this is some of my best writing. I
That's
really
so
feel like it's my
interesting.
best writing. And I submitted to Ellery Queen. Yeah. And I got a nice, lovely rejection, personal rejection. And so I put it to the side, and then I had written two more short stories, also in the young adult sphere, that I don't remember. Well, one was for an anthology. I'm not going to name names, but my friend's like, this is too good for that. They probably won't take it for that reason. It was a weird criticism, and I hate how that sounds coming out of my mouth. But she's like, don't bother. So I just packaged them up as 3, and I self-published them.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't let them sit on the computer. And who's to know when they would ever see the light of day?
Right.
And I got them edited. It's not like I didn't have them edited or proofread. Anything I self-publish goes through editing and proofreading.
Yeah.
Have to. I want it to be indistinguishable from traditionally published anything. So it was edited and stuff. And, if people read them to sample my work, 99 cents, they're very well written. I mean, I hope we all think our writing's good, but some of it's like, I'm like, this is the best thing I've written. So good.
Yeah. And writing short stories is totally different where, I struggle because I'm like, what's the arc? So I usually, when I write a short story, I'm like, here's a, just a moment of this character. And I picture this massive story because that's how I think. But I'm like, here's this moment where there's doing this. And to me, that's interesting, even if there's not much of an arc to it. I like just the idea. Here's an insight into this person's soul for, 5,000 words or something like that. The favorite thing I ever did is I actually got selected. One of my stories got selected for an R.L. Stine anthology. So I wrote this YA horror story. And I had my daughter, who was 14 at the time. She was the only one who looked at it, and she would like make notes on it and tell me how to change things. And then I submitted, and they accept my, holy shit, that's amazing. So that was that's my big success story with short stories. I was so excited for that.
I would like somebody, let this go out to the universe. I would like somebody to invite me to an anthology. I love writing short stories. I just think it's so fun. And I also get to experiment with, like, one of the short stories I wrote was full on noir, but it was teen noir. Like, there is no redeeming person in this book short story. And I loved it. I had so much fun. I wrote a garden, like a short story that takes place at a Sweet 16 party where there's a murder. It's sort of like a locked room garden party.
Yeah.
But it's so gritty, and I just made everybody awful, and I had so much fun with it.
That's awesome. Well, and that's what's great about anthologies is like you have to accept their premise. It has to be a story within whatever universe that they say, and it gets your mind like really going. Like, how can I do that? And even if it's not interesting to you, finding something that works as interesting within, maybe the anthology is about a bowling alley, and what are you going to do in that bowling alley? And like, you'll find something. And I love the fact that, like improv, you have to accept that premise, and then you have to yes and it, and then go with it.
And just the bowling alley, I'm like, ooh, like a 70s style.
Right. Before they're automated, there's people back there with the pens.
I'm thinking of some mobsters. I mean, like, my brain will just start churning.
Right.
And I have a lot of fun. And also, one of the things I feel about with short stories in particular is I can really fine tune my language, my words, which is where I have the most fun. One of the things I enjoy about writing is I like a meaty sentence, not a long sentence, but where each word is so perfectly, like, the perfect word choice.
Right.
Where I get like, I really enjoy that. So
right. And maybe, because I love to look at sentences and say, how can I make this sentence half as long and twice as potent, and I'll take nouns and make them into verbs or whatever it is. So it's like, and without describing things by that word choice, like, oh, I know exactly, when this cat is sharking my legs, I know exactly what you're talking about or whatever it is. But that's hard to do with a novel because it's exhausting.
It is exhausting. And I will kid you not, when my book went through proofreading and they were like, please go over it. And I was like, I do not want to read this again. I was like, please do not make me read this again. I was like, I don't want to look at it.
Exactly.
I was literal torture. It took me longer to proofread the novel than to edit it because I did not want to do it.
Right.
So I was like,
you're just so sick of it. Oh, yep.
So, and I had a friend do it. I was like, please go through this and see if there's any proofreading errors that they missed because I cannot bring myself to do it.
Yeah, I actually have my mom do it because she's got a Hawkeye, and she'll find stuff even post publication.
Yeah, that's the worst though. You're like, oh, don't tell me.
I know.
But
It can still get corrected in the ebook.
Yeah. And my friend, she is such a grammar nut that I'm like, she'll take apart, deconstruct every sentence and word to, and I was like, no. We're just looking for proofreading marks. Proofreading errors. That's it.
Right. And also understanding with grammar that, like, we, as a writer, you take purposeful liberties, and,
there were style things.
I have tons of sentences that are fully incomplete sentences. And it's just, and that's also goes back to being first person present tense, is like, that's how we think. Mm-hmm. We think in incomplete, structureless thoughts a lot of the times. And so tends to be how I write, but it would be a grammarian's nightmare.
She has a tendency she really can nitpick, like, interesting that you use this word here. Like, I'm like, okay, we're not doing that. We're looking for misplaced commas.
I'd rather read it myself at that point.
I gotta rein her in every time.
Right.
We're not doing that.
Right. Well, listen, Kimberly, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we are going to go back to your power of being able to conjure stories immediately, and we're going to do a very quick short storytelling. This is the fun part. I've chosen 3 books, somewhat at random from my bookshelves, and you're going to pick one of those books, and we're going to pick a page and a sentence. I'm going to read that sentence, and that's the first sentence of maybe a 2-minute long short story. You're going to give me maybe the next 2 or 3 sentences, what happens, whatever percolates in your head, and then I'll do a couple sentences, and we'll call it a day after that. So I've got actually a fantastic novel, Allie Land's Good Me, Bad Me. Okay. Caroline Cooney's Before She Was Helen. And Tell No Lies by Julie Compton. So
Cooney, Caroline B. Cooney.
Got it.
By the way, it started snowing here. The weather has come.
It is. Yeah, we're at the far western end in Colorado on it.
You're getting the weather too.
Yeah, we've had it since
different weather.
Oh, okay. Well, you're probably going to get this eventually because I think it's supposed to go everywhere. Give me a page between 1 and 300.
123.
Okay.
I want to be part of the United States where it's 70 degrees.
Yeah, it's not in either of our locations.
Yeah. Actually, we don't even have any snow on the ground. That's very weird for us. We usually have snowpack until late March.
Oh. Okay. I'm going to read this one sentence, and this is the first sentence. Character's name is Clemmy. Clemmy found herself whimpering in horror, turning the cell phone around as if she could adjust what she was seeing.
The image of the bound woman stirred her gut.
She had seen plenty of awful things on YouTube over the years. Sometimes it was hard not to. But this one was different, because even though the bound woman had a burlap sack over her head, she knew exactly who she was.
Yes, I was going to go there. Clemmy then recognized a pair of boots in the shot. Black, the leather scuffed, the laces undone. They were her brothers.
The video stuttered. The cell phone reception where Clemmy was horrible. So she patiently waited and waited, knowing there was another minute left in the video. When it finally buffered enough to keep playing, the door in the back of the room where the bound woman lay on the floor opened, and it stopped playing just again as she saw a pair of feet enter the room.
This pair of feet was slender, wearing heels, red crocodile leather. A woman emerged, and Clemmy could only see from the knee down. She couldn't understand what was going on. A bound woman, her brother's boots, and a mysterious woman in red heels.
She herself was trying to remember exactly what had happened last night, and was almost certain that somebody had slipped something into their drinks at the bar. Clemmy closed her eyes, waiting for the video to start again, and tried to focus, really focus, on those last few hours before she finally got home. And she did remember those heels. She remembered them specifically from the bar. Wasn't there a woman who had come up to them and ask them if they were new in town?
Unfortunately, Clemmy could not call the police because the one thing she did remember from the bar last night was being hit on by the police officer from the nearby precinct, who she then slapped across the face when he became too frisky and on his bar stool.
I think we call it there. That's fantastic. There's a lot of shit going on in that story.
And is that Caroline B. Cooney book, though? Is that a YA novel or is that an adult book?
It's a YA novel.
Yeah.
I blurbed it. I think it's YA, or it might be her first non-YA novel.
She's still amazing, Caroline B. Cooney. Based
Totally.
on a milk carton. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, still writing. I want to be her. I want to be still writing when I am.
Still inspired. Right. Still have stories to tell, and still maybe not liking it all the time that much.
No, but you know what? This has been a great conversation, because writing for 1 hour every day and just making it a habit, because that's how I got my daughter to practice piano. I was like, you just have to practice. You just have to play every day for whatever time you want to play. 5 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, I don't care. But you have to do it every single day. And she would put stickers to mark every day. And then she plays every single day for either 5 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever, but every day. And I'm like, why don't I do that?
Because I think ultimately at the root of all of that, there has to be a passion, even though it's hard to recognize sometimes, because we can all do something. Like, I could learn to play the piano amazingly if I started now and did it, but I would not like doing that 1 hour a day. So I think, like, you have to recognize what that passion is, whatever it is, and put it at the top of your priority list. And so without a passion for it, you and I would not be writing 5 minutes a day.
Yeah. I was telling somebody, I was like, I can't not write.
Right. I think that's how you define passion right there. Right.
Yeah.
If you can't not do it, then it's, you're meant to do it.
Otherwise I would just be going up to people like, I have this great story idea. Can I share it with you? I mean, I would just.
Right. Here's the book you should write. How many times have you done that? Yeah.
I've come up with I'm like, this isn't really in my wheelhouse, but you write domestic suspense. This would be great for you. You should do this.
Right. And nobody ever really realizes that, like, the last thing a writer wants is an idea from somebody else, because that's the whole fun of writing, is that you're creating it. And if it's somebody else's idea, you would always feel like, this isn't really my story.
Well, I know, but I'll be like, oh, I thought of this crime, but not really what I write. I'm like, you do it.
Well, Kimberly, it was great talking to you. Congratulations on the recent release. That's very exciting. I'm sure it doesn't get old for you.
It doesn't. No, this is the first time I've ever had an audiobook. This is the first time I've ever been in trade journals. This is the first time I've ever, my favorite thing to do is to check to see which libraries have my book. Totally. That's my favorite thing to do.
But as an ex-librarian, I'm sure that's in your wheelhouse. So that's awesome. Well,
thank you so much. This was so much fun.
Yeah, no, it was absolutely fun. I enjoyed talking to you, and continued success.
You too. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye.
So that's it. That's my conversation with Kimberly Giarratano. That was great. And I knew she was going to be good at the storytelling because she had talked about, kind of, when we had that little conversation about the anthology with the bowling alley, her mind was already spinning. And she did not disappoint. That story had a lot going on for it, a good mystery. I'm not quite sure how it ends. I'm not quite sure I even want it to end. I kind of just liked it, how it ended, where we had it there. So please go find out more about her. Like I said, her latest release is Death of a Dancing Queen, and you can go to her website, which is KimberlyGiarratano.com. And you can go to my website, CarterWilson.com, and find out about my books, sign up for my newsletter, figure out what events I'll be at, all that good stuff. And you can also go listen to all the past episodes of Making It Up at the website and on YouTube and wherever you get your favorite podcasts. So that's it for now. Thank you for watching and or listening to this episode of Making It Up. New episodes coming out very soon. In the meantime, as always, take care.